I see that like this, what Mukesh Ambani ji, announced, creating the largest data center and all that. Ultimately, AI is not just software. It is, hardware, because you need to have that big computing data centers and all that. The problem is Indian VCs are very inclined to invest in B2C startups. B2B startups, they want to explore more and more, but no, ultimately they give it a pass. One country claims demographics as a strength, and that actually is kind of limiting quality and completely focused long-term R&D on manufacturing and hardware.
Keep focusing on hardware innovation.
Yes, don't neglect that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Manufacturing Mindset. I'm Sarvesh Kanodia, an investor by profession and a life coach by passion. And let me introduce you to Mr. Sunil Vedula, who is the founder and CEO of Nanoprecise, which is a global technology company that is making manufacturing plants more efficient. Thank you, Sunil, for coming onto the show.
Welcome. It's an honor, Sarvesh. Thank you for having me.
Super. So, Sunil, before we start talking about the company, tell us about yourself. And, especially in your case, you're staying in Canada now while you were born and brought up in India. So, tell us about the journey that led you to moving to Canada and starting a venture there.
Sure. I'm a mechanical engineer by background. I did engineering from India, from Delhi College of Engineering, which is now Delhi Technological University. And after that, I basically, worked in an EPC, engineering procurement construction firm. And my job was to basically, design piping and pipeline systems for refineries before they are constructed, basically in a greenfield way. And after that, I thought, I wanted to do an MBA because technology commercialization is always, is really interesting, because one is tech, one is engineering, and how do you make money out of it, either for your customers or your shareholders, or for yourself, right? How do you add value, and how do you commercialize that technology is important. So that's why I thought doing the MBA would be great. And I chose Canada before, basically because Canada was like University of Alberta was one of the top universities in Canada, and basically it was the only program that was providing MBA with a specialization in natural resources, energy, and environment.
Now let's talk about the company itself, right? Like what gap did you see? Of course, all of these, areas around the technology, and you mentioned about the energy consumption. What gap did you see from a market, sort of standpoint, that led you to starting an IoT focused company, which is focusing on manufacturing productivity? And give a sense of what your company also does.
Yeah. So I think, see, if we talk about machines, right, which is the most complicated machine, human body, right? And how do we diagnose problems for human body? There's a 5-step process. Number one is that if 5 senses in our body feel something is wrong, we go to the doctor, and then doctor writes a couple of tests. The second step, that what he does is, he, based on those blood test reports and all that, he diagnoses the problem. The third step is basically, if the problem is very severe, if it is, let's say, some kind of early stage cancer, then the first question the patient might ask, well, how much time do I have, right? So the third step is called remaining time to failure prediction. So till that, we when I started Nanoprecise, till this was very clear that when we can do that, when we should do that for a human body, why we should not do that for machines that are consuming 60% of the global energy consumption, right? And we just need to figure out the technology, the supply chain to provide the technology, and to make sure it is scalable and monitorable and all of that, right? Accurate, but this is worth, attending. But in terms of the machines, there are two further objectives. What we realized is that, and this is also, applicable to human body too, is that when there's a problem in any machinery, like if there's a bearing fault, right? it's it will go to failure long later, okay? much before that, it's already starts consuming more energy. So I figured out that for both for human body and for the machinery in a plant, right? For a human body, instead of waiting till the early stage cancer hits you, if there is an app that tells you how are you doing on a daily basis in terms of the food intake you take, how much sleep you have, how much are you exercising, right? All of that. In the same way for the machinery, detect the problem way early, and instead of deciding whether to notify or not, depending on just a remaining time to failure, because it may have a remaining time to failure of, let's say, 100,000 hours, but probably it already started consuming 10% more in increase in energy consumption. That is costing for a 250 horsepower motor. You're talking about losing $1,200 per machine per month. That is huge. And you can run with that inefficiency for a long time before expecting a machine to go down, right? So that's why the fourth step. So I talked about anomaly detection, fault diagnosis, remaining time to failure prediction. The fourth step was, which was a trigger, is that energy losses, right? And the fifth step is, of course, these are all negative news, but how do you fix it? What's the root cause? Because bearing problem is just a symptom. What is the root cause? And because you only fix the root cause, not the symptom. So what's root cause and associated action? So this 5-step methodology is what really propelled us to go into this problem, to solve this problem. And that's what really Nanoprecise is doing, using a combination of an IoT based sensor and an AI powered software. And honestly, we never wanted to come up with our own sensor. And maybe that will be your next question, but we had to come up with our own sensor. And I had to fight a lot with the VCs, because VCs were preferring all these, especially in India and even outside too. Everybody's all, hey, I don't want hardware, only software, software. Well, there was a I myself, I'm a mechanical. I don't even know electronics engineer, but I did enough research and I know about the problem that I'm solving and the variables that we are taking from the already available data. That's what a lot of software related, manufacturing industry 4.0 startups are doing, because they get, that message from the VCs, but that will not solve your problem. It's basically like you're measuring, like a oxygen intake to determine whether the person has a problem or not. Well, the oxygen can go up and down even when you're running, right? What you really need is not the process fluctuations of the body, because the process fluctuations of the body is what you're putting into the body. Just like, for the machine, what you're putting into the machine. What you need to measure is how your body is responding to those process fluctuations, machine is responding to those process fluctuations, right? So anyways, yeah, that's why we had to come up with our own IoT sensor too, and the software. Yeah.
And of course, right, like when you think about preventive health, this is one of those things that everyone knows we should do it, but, we still sort of avoid, right? Similarly, when you apply that same principle in a machine context and you're going after clients who are large, many of them perhaps have not innovated for years now, right? And as you're trying to sort of sell to them, what has been their reaction like, and what has been your experience in trying to change their behavior from not thinking about it proactively to now actually preventive, sort of maintenance, as the word also goes, right? In terms of what you're sort of trying to do.
Yes, and one of the things that we have realized is we are in the business of changing behavior, right? And why that is difficult is because the messaging has to be really, really first of all, it has to be really concise, and it has to be really objective in terms of dollar values and ROIs. More than even ROIs, I would say dollar value. And it has to be believable, right? Because if you basically give some numbers based on some random assumptions and they feel like, wow, I mean, I don't even believe that, right? That breaks the trust right away. So that's why what we did not start with including energy consumption and increase in energy consumption. We started strictly with identifying what's the anomaly, okay, and more importantly, what's the fault, and what's the remaining time to failure due to that fault, so that you know when how do you describe the severity, as I told you, right? Like, if a doctor tells a patient, oh, you have a cancer, right? Like, and you don't tell him what's the stage of the cancer and how much time you have, he's like, he will go mad in the same way. And if you say, oh, it's less severe, it's more severe, it has to be basically either in hours or in terms of, well, it has reached to 40% of the body and the 60% is remaining, something like that, right? In the same way, for the machinery, we tell the wear factor till the remaining time to failure comes less than 750 hours. We don't tell it in hours, we tell it in wear percentage, WEAR, wear percentage. That's 60% has worn out, only 40% is remaining, like that. But if it is less than 750 hours, we tell them basically, that it is, let's say, 540 hours or something like that, right? But the next step was, he has lots of maintenance and sites, okay, lots of problems, and they only have limited people in the plant. So which ones do I prioritize should not be just based on the remaining time to failure, some because in terms of the human body, it is totally different. Every human body is important. But in terms of machine, it's not the case. Some are more important than the other. I can let some fail, no problem, right? Others I cannot. It depends on what's the dollar value, apart from what will it cause in production losses due to the downtime, apart from that. So we are now basically putting additional prioritization in terms of which machine is costing you more. I mean, in all the faulty machines, which one is costing you more in terms of the energy consumption increase, right? And also, what's the root cause behind that, and associated action. Because if you don't take the associated maintenance action, he's not able to decide what tools I need to, for an action to do that maintenance. What people, how many pipe fitters do I need? How many maintenance technicians do I need to attend that? So all of these he needs to prepare for preparing the maintenance work order. So that's why we added the energy consumption and the root cause and associated action, because we, as I mentioned, right, we have to incentivize them to take a maintenance action, but also influence their behavior by telling them the solution, not just the problem.
Got it. These are very, very, I would say, useful concepts, right? About how to convince a customer, especially for something that is totally new. I think one thing I took away was just the messaging has to be so simple. It has to be easy for them to understand in their own language, which is what matters to them. And the moment you hit that right chord with that simple and yet powerful and important messaging, it sort of resonates with them, right? Secondly, even quantifying it rather than leaving it vague, it's very quantifiable, right? You talked about the wear percentage, the time to failure, the reduction in cost, energy consumption. All of these are things you can actually quantify and present it to the client. So it's no more a concept to them. This is actually something that they are seeing it, right? And thirdly, all the time, no matter how large or small a company you are, you're always strapped for resources. So how do you even prioritize which one to sort of focus on? So it's not like you have 10 problems and you need to solve 10 of them, which are the top three that I need to focus on. So at least let's start with that. And then, of course, as you build trust with the solution, there are a lot more things that you can do and, go deeper with that particular client itself.
Absolutely, you nailed it, Savish.
Super. Let's go back to the question. When we were talking about the previous question and you mentioned about the hardware and the software bit, right? And having, been in the industry myself as a PVC investor, I totally understand where that sort of comes from, right? Where on one hand, see software companies and they are, figuring out how to innovate. And the moment you add the layer of hardware, from the external mind, it's almost like how do you then prioritize, right? Can you actually do both? So talk to us about that, right? Like what does it take actually when you're inside the company to innovate both on hardware and software at the same time? And which one is more difficult, or how do you sort of think about, okay, this perhaps requires more effort in terms of development, stabilization? Is it hardware or is it software in your case?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, it is definitely difficult doing hardware and software at the same time. Software, if you start with software with a little short-term mentality that I need money quick, right? The problem with that is you might actually compromise on the data quality. If you don't have the right data, for the right to solve a specific problem, right? And these days, even LLMs, if you don't use a right activation function to solve a specific, because not every activation function is good for every problem, right? So for example, wavelet as an activation function is much better than sigmoid as a function for and we have already proven with the accuracy in a lot of other studies and all that for our kind of mechanical defects and all that. So that's why the quality of the data is extremely important, and that's the reason why we had to come up with our own sensor. And it is hard, but it is absolutely important if the data quality is worth it, and it is always easy to iterate with the software within no time. Rather than doing that, it is always good for you to start with a bigger problem first. Yeah, I know it's a high risk, but there can be a high reward.
Very interesting. I'm taking two takeaways from what you mentioned. I think in one in your case, and it could be applicable for many other folks in other sectors as well. In your case, you didn't have an option, and so you had to focus on the hardware. But the flip side of that is, while short term there is a pain, there is a cost, etc., involved. But in the long term, that also creates a moat, right? In this context, I want to talk about India, because when you talk about India, of course, we talk about services, software, etc. But hardware has been one of those places where we still have a long way to go compared to many other countries, including some of our Asian competitors as well, right? And now, of course, as I'm digging deeper into the space, I'm realizing there are some pockets like colleges, for example, like an IIT Madras, with a lot of work happening, right? And some other colleges across the country as well, but it still needs a lot of work over there, right? What is it that basis your observation of India that we need to do differently to promote more hardware innovation? Is there something that is required from the government point of view, other ecosystem player point of view, and any learnings from whatever you might have observed?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, to be very honest, we actually got almost $700,000 worth of a grant from Canadian government, right? So that's a big amount, and that is the kind of support uh, is needed for a hardware startup, especially in India, because when you are starting a hardware in India, most of the chips are not made. Most of the accelerometers are not even resistors or capacitors are made in India, right? So for hardware, most of the components you end up importing from outside. And when you import anything in India, you have to pay import taxes and shipping, whatnot, right? So more than the talent itself, like the capital expenditure required on this is extremely prohibitive for a country like India. And one of the things that Indian government really needs to think is that they need to, apart from the grants, they really need to probably just waive the customs taxes and everything for a startup organization on any hardware components as a beginning, right? That's the least you can do. And that will that itself will, because customs is like 80%, right? And lot of people do a lot of things like hiding actual prices of the hardware and all that. They take all those shortcuts because they can't pay that much price, and then they get stuck in the customs again. They have to pay some, lobby them or whatnot, right? This has to stop, because this wastes your time. This basically doesn't let the innovation and hardware happen, right? That's the bare minimum. Apart from the fact that you need to let those, which I think this Make in India initiative and all of that, we are getting more hardware manufacturers like Foxconn, everybody. But I'm afraid that this should have been done long back, but never, better late than never. And apart from that, special grants for hardware related tech startups, right? So a mixture of both will really help hardware innovation, because with hardware in India, it is not about lack of talent, it is not about lack of will, it is not about lack of knowledge. It is really because in hardware design, you have to be resourceful, right? More than the software. Because, and the best part is, because you can touch it and all that, you have very minimal space. You have to optimize the form factor. In hardware, it is never about like a what max you can go. It's about, always about optimization. Optimization is the main puzzle that you solve, and that Indians are very good at. The problem, the government has to step up and really, help innovation in case of the hardware. I would say government has a big role to play more than the startups.
Interesting. And talk also from a manufacturing ecosystem point of view, because you are a company that operates across countries, across continents, in fact, and so you are seeing manufacturing plants across the globe. What is the difference that you see of plants, the owners' behavior here in India compared to some of the other countries? And what do you think needs as change here, or what are we doing probably even better? Like, I'm sure there are things that we're doing better that others can learn from, but what do we need to do as an ecosystem, as a manufacturing ecosystem, companies, founders themselves?
I think in terms of the companies, like the B2B companies that we deal with, the clients, so we have, almost 35% of our business is in US, 15% is in 15 to 20% is in Canada, 20% of our business is in India, right? We deal with Tata, Birla, Reliance, and all of that. And then basically, we have the rest of the business is from Middle East, APAC, and Europe, right? So what we realized is that, and we did some data analysis, when we see that GDP per capita is more than $15,000 per annum, right? The attitude of the manufacturers is really different in a way that they are not worried about price that much. Of course, everybody's worried about ROI. They're more worried about ROI. But below that, what happens is that they're always worried about lowest price, lowest price, lowest price. And the reason for that is because they think that, oh, I have, a billion population. I mean, everybody will come and work. So you have to give, otherwise I'll just let it go as it is, right? Like let it continue as it is. If I have to, if I have to automate it, if I have to change it, it better be cheaper. So they're only seeing how they can basically replace the already cheaper workforce they have on the plant side with a more cheaper. That is not how you should look at it. So what is happening ultimately is that the Indian manufacturers have a knack, basically they're only looking for automation to replace the already lower cost labor, but lower trained labor. I mean, not so well trained labor, right? And and to train that, you have to put a lot of effort, right? So it's a chicken and egg situation, and that is where they have to really think that basically, like, this training would happen over time, right? And how do we make sure that we basically, while upskilling, we are also, choosing automation, not just based on the lowest price, but based on what will provide me the highest ROI, right? And which one can guarantee me the ROI, right? So that's my 2 cents about that. Yeah.
The other aspect, I think, which I took away, which is a very softer but something which plays a big role, is just the mindset, right? The short term versus the long term mindset. I think, and this is not just in manufacturing, but I'm seeing this across sectors. In India, even when we talk about investing, right? Like, people have a short-term mindset as well, right? Okay, how do I make the best returns in 1 year or 2 year, as opposed to saying that, okay, if I invest this money for the next 5, 7 years, do I see this compounding annually greater than any other asset class, right? And in many other, not just this, but many other factors as well, where we are used to now thinking very short term, and I think that is just the mindset shift as a nation, I think we need to have, right? Um, let's switch gears a little bit, and let's talk about the space in which you're sort of operating, right? Obviously, it's a space where you have incumbents who've been present in the space, but you've actually managed to carve out a space for yourself, right? What do you think has been the factor behind why the larger incumbents in the space haven't been able to do this as well as you've done? It's not like they can't hire a good team or they don't have the resources, and what's been the factor behind that, and how have you seen it after some of the early success that you've seen? What has been their reaction to it? Because they must be seeing how well you're doing, and how you navigating that situation.
Yeah, I'm. The way I would answer is, I mean, see, we just crossed, 10 million ARR, right, just recently. So I would say we are still too early. Like, I mean, if we cross 50 million ARR, I would have been in a better situation to talk about this. But what I can say is that, your question is very appropriate. What I would say is, right from the beginning of Nanoprecise, we always had a global mindset in terms of, because the kind of problem that we were solving, and the kind of disciplines we needed for both hardware and software, and the support, and all of that. And I looked at basically, what kind of skill set is required. And it was very clear that you cannot just solve it with the expertise of people from India. You cannot solve it from people expertise from the people of USA. You cannot solve it with the expertise of people from Canada. You need a globally diverse workforce. For example, for the Canadian talent is really good in hardware, because there's a lot of incentive from the government, following from the China's example, to invest in hardware development, hardware R&D, especially, like, not in low cost hardware. Like, China even does low cost hardware, high cost everything. But Canada understood way earlier that we have to invest in top class R&D, and high skilled hardware, like Germany and all that, like nanotechnology and all that. That's why we had a good hardware talent here. USA is always good about its commercial. You will find the best salespeople, best commercially savvy, best product guys in US, right? India is really good for software talents. There is no doubt about that. It's a world class for, and more importantly, the kind of ROI that you get for a software talent in India is top notch, right? Like, so seeing, so looking at all of this, we always had a global mindset right from the beginning. And yes, that comes at a cost, because you have to spend a lot of late night and all that. So for the first 3-4 years, trust me, I was sleeping basically 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. every day, and waking up at 7 a.m., right? Basically every single day, right? So, except, of course, weekends, right? So what I would say is that having that global mindset is extremely important. And not just because when you're solving a global problem, you cannot really, like, and you want to take on the existing incumbents, you cannot actually just think, I want to be limited to Canada right now. I know, like, basically a lot of VCs say that focus is the most important thing. So what I did is that my focus was, we are also focused, but we are focused in a different way. What we are saying is, we are focused on all the countries where GDP per capita is more than $15,000 per annum. India is kind of an exception for us in that matter, because we already had a software development team, so we continued with that. And even in India, we are only targeting top accounts where pricing is not a problem or whatever, something like that. But we basically made sure that we are focused on the customer, not just the geography. And basically, the profile of the customer in terms of the lifetime value. So we define, our focus is ICP, ideal customer profile. Our focus is not just a geography. Geography is one part of it, right? But there are other things that will define your equation of an ideal customer profile. So that's what our focus is, right? Yeah.
So, and you mentioned about this whole multi-geography operations as well, right? And given that you have such a global talent, how do you manage a unified culture, right? One, there is a hard, I mean, even within a local office, you'll see a sales team having a different culture, the tech team having a different culture, and ops team having a different culture, right? Even within the same organization, same location. As you manage this,
Yes, and I can say that, like, our team attrition last year has been less than 3%. So based on that, what I can say is that being completely transparent and honest with the people, and basically I give my team, doesn't matter whoever, a complete flat hierarchy, in its total sense, and having absolute down to earth mentality that, guys, reach out to me. Uh, don't ask me help when the shit hits the ceiling. Reach out to me anytime, no problem. Here is my, here is my calendar. Just, I'm available Saturday to, Monday to Sunday, 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. 12 a.m. Right. So just schedule a call, right? And let's go ahead and discuss. We don't care who is at what position, what level. It doesn't matter. It's a complete flat hierarchy, and we believe in that. The only differences that we have is really because of the from outside, from external differences that are created because of the fact that the customer in India is very price sensitive. So the sales guys from India is like always like, oh, we need to compete on pricing, while the US guys, we basically keep coaching them and focus on value, because the value that we are creating is 10 times. Even if our competitor is 15% lower than us, you're only getting 0.5x. You look at the 9.5x, right? Who is giving the guarantee for the 9.5x? If we are giving the guarantee for 9.5x, convince customer on that guarantee. You know, that's the point. Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. So you're seeing, I think, very interesting concepts, right? Like that you outlined. One was having that transparency, right? Making sure that everyone is sort of aware of what's happening, and one manifests, of course, in many other ways. The other is the flat hierarchy, right? It doesn't matter I'm a junior or a senior, and I sort of see this in my experience as well. My previous fund, when I was at Tomidel Network, I mean, even when I was junior there, I was pretty much doing the same work that I was doing. I was a senior. It's just that I was getting less paid when I was a junior, but I was probably doing that same work. And I think which really helped me, sort of grow, right? It didn't matter, who I was meeting with or where I was going. I had the complete autonomy to do everything that I wanted to do on a deal, right? To make sure that the deal happened or to help a portfolio company. And I saw that how it sort of helped me and others in our organization as well. So I think that is something I sort of relate to as well. And the third part you mentioned was sort of being available, right? Like when the leader is himself or herself available at all times, it's like that you have to also buck up and do what you need to do, right? Because you're sort of leading from the front in that sense. Let's talk a little bit about Canada as an ecosystem, right? And you've seen both India ecosystem, because you've been here and you're seeing there as well. What do you think are things that both ecosystems can sort of learn from each other, right? What is it that India can learn from the Canada ecosystem? What is it that Canada can learn from the Indian ecosystem? And what's the difference in the fundraising for a startup as well, in India compared to a Canada?
Yeah, yeah. So on the first part, in terms of the ecosystem, I would say India ecosystem is really good, right? Like, I mean, in terms of the rigor and vigor of the people, and how, like, how hungry they are in terms of what they want, and like the thought clarity, and the fact that they are ready to give, like, because in those early years it is basically like a meditation. You have to be at it with your whole heart, taking care of your body 24/7, right? So it really is like that, and I see that a lot in India, that the ecosystem is there. So on ecosystem part, India is really good when it comes to compared to Canada, and Canada is also good. It's coming up, yes, of course. US ecosystem is good, but US has so much capital, right? So in terms of the capital available to the kind of talent that is being produced, and the companies that is being produced, India has really good marks. I would rate India very high in terms of ecosystem, in terms of the quality of the entrepreneurs that India has, the thought process, the clarity, and all that. So on the second part, right, in terms of the ecosystem, the funding or VC ecosystem. So because I basically this year especially I started looking for, why a lot of Indian investors got interested to invest in us, right? The problem is, and this is my personal opinion, is that Indian VCs are very inclined to invest in B2C startups. B2B startups, they want to explore more and more, but no, ultimately they give it a pass. So as like every VC has a quota of, you have to reject 9 startups. You have to show that you have rejected 9 startups and selected one. So that B2B falls in that rejected list actually. So helps them do their assignment. But the in Canada it's totally different. In Canada or USA it's totally different, because, and again, it comes down to structural differences of, you don't have so much labor workforce, right? So you have to automate. Why US and Canada and all of these guys are doing AI so much? Because for them to become competitive with China and India and other places where the demographics is a strength, they have to automate it, right, and bring it on even level. And that's why there's so much push on, and B2B startups are given so much important. B2B startups are basically get a lot of funding here, right? And especially in Canada, most of the successful Canadian startups are actually B2B, right? And whether it is very high ticket size enterprise B2B, or mom and pop shops B2B, but even Shopify, for that matter, is basically encouraging B2B, right? It's not B2C. So like very less companies are there in Canada that are successful are B2C, right? Most of the exits, most of the big companies are basically B2B, right? So it's a totally different, um, completely different, just because of the fact that one country claims demographics as a strength, right? And that actually is kind of limiting the bent towards, you know, quality and completely focused long-term R&D on manufacturing and hardware, compared to one where we don't have demographics, right? And so we have to create automation and automation always comes with both hardware and software. Automation can never come just with a software, right? Because software only controls hardware, but you need to have hardware doing, having at least those arms or anything to do actual job, right? So you can write the best firmware or software for that hardware, but if it does not have those functionalities, you can't do much, right? And Indian ecosystem needs a big overhaul, and Indian VC ecosystem needs a big overhaul. But I I understand the like what do you say, the the catch 22 situation of Indian VCs, because without that ecosystem that government needs to create, right, which takes a long time, by the way, the manufacturing and hardware and all that. Without that, how will VCs just pump money? Because job of VC is to create return. How can they just pump money and assume to take all the risks if the grants are not in place, right? So totally understood, but that's the big difference in the ecosystem there.
Yeah, and if I were to argue in, from a VC or a PE perspective, right, I think the issue is that the Indian market by itself, which we were discussing earlier, is not that large, right? Because the smaller players don't like to pay for technology, quality, etc. It's just the larger folks who can pay for it. And as a result, the India B2B market ends up being very small, which means that then you do have to go international. And then, of course, that becomes a very different business then, right? So for us also, like when we look at deals at times when there's an early stage deal and they've proven PMF in India. Now the question I'm sitting on is they've proven PMF in India, but will it translate to when they go to an international geography, right? So then I was like, okay, let me see how it plays out internationally, right? And then we'll sort of take a call, right? Of course, someone else can take a different call depending upon what information, etc. they have. But then for the founder, there are many who then will probably not be comfortable until they've proven out the international market, right? But there's again some work, some capital that you need to get to that. So I think that is that. Whereas in a Canada or a US, perhaps that is not the issue, right? The local market is large enough for you to get started PMF, and it's enough for the investors to get convinced for you to get more capital. So that becomes like a self sort of perpetuating cycle in that sense, right? Where it is helping you grow. Whereas in this case, it becomes like a self-limiting cycle, to that extent. So I think that's probably the difference. You mentioned about AI, right? And let's sort of close our discussion, with AI. Given everything I think around us is being influenced by it. Of course, there's a lot of talk about DeepSeek very recently as well, and this whole Industry 4.0 now moving to Industry 5.0. What do you think are some of the themes, be it AI or in manufacturing, especially around this whole convergence of the two, that you think entrepreneurs should think about and start building for that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would say is that what DeepSeek really showed us is basically frugal engineering, right? And honestly, in India, we are really good at that, right? But to be very honest, if you look at AI, like AI, right? Like ultimately, AI is not just software. It is, hardware, because you need to have that big computing data centers and all that. I was surprised to see this. I looked at this chart, um, total data centers by country and all that. I was surprised to see that Canada has as much computing capacity and data centers as India has, actually more than that, for probably the population of Delhi and Mumbai combined at max. Right? So, like, I mean, you got to, and that is why I see that, like, this what Mukesh Ambani ji announced, creating the largest data center and all that. The fact that Indian like telecom rates are one of the lowest, right? But again, the quality, honestly, I have been to India many times, but very recently, and the problem with is the it's very patchy. The network is very patchy. Here, the network is really good. Like, you go to South Korea, here, USA, the network is awesome, right? You get low cost, but again, everywhere what I see is that, the quality matters in the service. And and the biggest problem that I see is that for the same quality, right? uh People are ready to pay the price. At least it reduces the market size, but then that quality has to be consistent. It has to be consistently delivered. And there has to be agencies that are constantly monitoring in a secret way that people are giving that quality service or not. But overall, what I see is that computing capacity and like that really matters. That has the ability to give more AI start give growth to more AI startups, and ultimately, like, but yes, frugal engineering is important. But before that, like, after US, or even basically China has as much computing capacity as US, right? So all this talk of China's model was 10 times lower, right? Yes, that is true. But for that, how much they iterated, nobody knows that. How much data they played on, nobody knows that. Correct? So that is important. So all that starts with hardware. So ultimately, the buck stops in India with the fact that the the hardware, or the data computing, and all of the data center, all of these needs to be really given a lot of emphasis for ultimately AI to succeed, because the future is about not about just software, like all those software innovations which will basically make things easier. They have already been done, right? The real software innovation is now coming to make human jobs even better, right? And remove all the repeatable jobs. Whatever you were doing yesterday, if you're doing the same thing again today, tomorrow, and all that, it has to be done by some machine, because you have to elevate. If we all, as a human being, has to become a superior alien race, so that in the future we have, we don't need even money, or we can basically fulfill all our requirements without jeopardizing the climate. For that, this kind of innovation needs to keep happening. It cannot just come in software. It has to be both hardware and software. Yeah.
Super. So you're saying the message to all entrepreneurs is focus on hardware and not as much on software. There's any which ways it'll keep happening,
It has
but
both.
keep focusing on hardware. Yes, but keep focusing on hardware innovation.
Yes. Don't neglect that. Yes.
Super. Thank you, Sunil. This has been super. I think we've, sort of covered so many topics, right? From hardware to Canada to China, India ecosystem, talking about, managing companies across different continents, managing the culture, what more we could do in India. This has been spectacular. I've learned so much, in the conversation today. So really appreciate you taking out the time.
Thanks, Sarvesh. It's an honor to be on your podcast, and I hope I added a little bit of value. But I understand my thoughts are just limited to my little experience, and definitely. So there are always I'm learning myself. So I just shared what I felt from my own experience, seeing because I lived in India for almost 24 years of my life, then came here living for last 12 13 years and traveled to different places. Overall, I would say it's just I'm still learning, so whatever I shared is very limited to me, and I definitely think that world is way beyond what I said, and looking for any comments, positive, negative, any critiques. I'm always learning. Yeah.
Super. I'm looking forward to the journey ahead and what you do with Nanoprecise.
Thank you.
Thank you.